Hello, Rodney.
Hello, hey Sandy, how's it going?
Well, thanks to you. Long time no hear your voice.
I should check in often, but I've been good. Hope you've been well and everyone as well.
Yes, very well, thank you.
Hey Rodney,
Hello,
how are
how are you,
you?
Justice?
I'm all right,
Thanks.
thank you. One day at a time.
Doing great myself, you know. Glad to hear
Excellent.
you still uh keeping things very, very nice, yeah. Home stuff is pretty exciting, so excited to be as well.
Have you been keeping an eye on our features and our development for release 4?
I not as close as wanted to be. Things kind of got hectic. Lots of stuff to keep an eye on, but I've been aware of the cool things that are coming along.
Oh, fantastic. Hey Dom,
Hello, hello.
how are you today?
Good. And how are you guys?
Yeah, all right, thank you. I'm feeling jet lagged. I'm
Oh, where
glad
you been?
that Rodney is here to run the session on Foley's behalf.
Run the session.
Did
Insert
did Fo-
something
did
about
Foley not
the
did
help.
Foley not tell you what you were going to be doing today when he sent you to this meeting?
No. I'm here in spirit just to see if things are going along nicely, you know. I'm more of like an overseer basically, not a runner.
Well, thank you, and you appreciate you attending nonetheless.
Have you been traveling recently? Jet lag from?
I was in the States last week, which is why I'm feeling a little bit rough today. Like yesterday,
What
about
flight
7 o'clock, I
prices
couldn't keep my eyes open.
geez, did you not go watch the World Cup and just sticking around for the final?
No, thank you. Um, you get a better World Cup experience on the television, I believe. You get to see
Really?
replays and you get to see close-ups, and it's much better on TV and cheaper.
Yeah, I
The, the,
was asking, weren't the flight prices pretty crazy this time around?
Actually, not too bad. I was surprised. Um, it was pretty standard.
That's a shock.
I don't know who else we're going to get today, so maybe we can just quickly have an informal chat and maybe just check where we are. I saw that we had a message from Festus, who gave quite a few, seemed like fairly good um, suggestions and some guidance. And then he called you out by name, Dom. So he said he was quite happy with the work that you've done so far and illustrating the progress. So well done for that.
All right, thank you.
Um, I don't know if anybody had an opportunity to actually look through his suggestions, but he gave us insights into sort of the what he thought were the main gaps. Gave some guidance around a definition of done, of what this would look like once our task here is complete. And then he proposed a canonical automation path. That's also maybe something that we can look at. Well, one of the things that I would like to get to, and I'm not too sure how we actually turn this from sort of a discussion and the collaboration and brainstorming around sort of the focus of what we want to achieve and the scope, but into actual execution, right? How do we deliver whatever it is that we are proposing to deliver? Because at some point we need to actually deliver some scripts, Helm charts, and those kind of things. And I think against that background, we probably need to look at what currently exists and how much of that can be repurposed. We need to kind of define what we think a deployment process is going to look like, based on, everybody else's experience. Where does the process start? What is the work that needs to be done? And where does the process end? I think we did agree that this is going to be some sort of two-phase process anyway. So you're going to have the initial deployment piece, and then you're also going to have a configuration piece, which you will then do through the admin services API. And then after that, you will then have, in theory, a system that is up and running. And you're going to want to do that across a number of different systems. So you're going to want to deploy a development environment, or you want to deploy a QA, a pre-prod environment, and then you want to be able to deploy consistently your production environment. And all of those should, in theory, be similar, if not identical. All right, so how do we want to go about that, right? Do we have up front maybe a view of what we think a high-level process would look like, right? And starting that process, like we said before, we are not necessarily going to tell people how to create the infrastructure, but we do want to tell them what that infrastructure must look like before they begin. It must be Kubernetes, and I suppose there should be a sort of an arrangement of components or servers or things like that that conforms to their actual requirements that support scaling. But the trigger for me for this discussion, I think, is, let me put this up here. If we wanted to draw a process here, right? The trigger for the start is infrastructure is ready, whatever that means. Does anybody else have a view on another trigger for a starting point?
I don't know if this was covered before, apologies, but where would the Helm repository be? I'm talking about like where we pull the charts, not necessarily where the code is. I don't know if
Right. So
perhaps confusing you more. But where do we get the infrastructure from?
So I'm going to throw the question back to you for two reasons. One, I have absolutely no idea, unless it is what we're already proposing. So what we do have, and let's go here just so that we can take a quick look at what exists today. I want to be here. So let's pick one of these, right? Okay, thank you. Do you mean in one of these locations, or do you mean something else? Let me clarify that first.
Okay, I'll make an example with something like Docker Hub, right? So Docker Hub is where we put our Helm, not Helm, but our Docker images, and then we pull from
Yes.
there, right? So we need something similar for Helm, where we put our Helm artifacts so you can pull from them to create your infrastructure and so forth. So that's separate from the code.
From the code.
That
Okay.
from artifacts.
Huh. So at the moment, from Tazama's perspective, we host, I assume, is the code, right, on GitHub. And this is what you're talking about. This is the code.
That is the code, yes. So the
And
artifact itself will generally be a single, I think it's a YAML file, index.yaml. You can use GitHub for it, but I guess that's a separate discussion if we want
I'm
to use that.
I'm going to ask a very ignorant question, right?
Sure.
Is how do you, as a deployer, get from code to that artifact?
You run a Helm command. I think it's Helm build, which should generate the artifact, but it's a
Okay.
single command.
So is that, let me go here. Is that here? And what would you call that artifact?
It's just a Helm artifact.
Is that inside the process, do you think? Or is that outside the process? Because are you going to be, let's say, for example, so the Helm artifact is, here is our Helm GitHub repo, right? And that is an input into whatever this process is, right? So Tazama is responsible for this piece, right? We create, publish, and maintain these. So at any point, this is unlikely to be a once-off exercise. If we are updating this or deploying additional components or changing something in the deployment, we would publish new Helm charts to the repository. Let me just do this here. Let's be fully descriptive, right? So you may routinely do this as part of the process, right? There is also a sort of a trigger, I guess, here that says to what extent what are we trying to do? I don't know if this makes a difference at all, but let's put this here, right? It could be either one of these two things. You could be deploying or redeploying. Maybe they are different, maybe they are not different, but they could potentially be. So the dependency here is if you are deploying, redeploying, let's be a little bit more verbose about what the process actually is. I want to deploy Tazama, right? I want to provision infrastructure. And I want to do you install Kubernetes, or what's the right word for Kubernetes, anyone?
You do install that, yes.
Right. These are sort of first steps, but dependencies, and these are for our purposes out of scope, right? This is a prerequisite. Let's go here. For now. right? Because that's what we said. It's like we're not going to be too worried about it, but we do want to give people a template for doing it because we need to be able to do it ourselves to showcase the system. But either way, you're provisioning the infrastructure, you're installing Kubernetes, right? And then, to your point, Rodney, we are now saying you will build Helm artifacts. And we should tell people what that process is, but if you are building Helm artifacts, I'm assuming that those artifacts end up on your own infrastructure somewhere.
Okay.
Because
Another
these Helm
question.
charts are yours, right? Your artifacts. There may be some sort of, I don't know, parameterization or something that happens in the middle here. So if you're adding secrets to those charts, or if you're adding specific locations or modifying their scope or their shape in any way, that would happen somewhere in between here, right? What does that typically look like?
Before that, I
Where does
do
that
have
happen?
a question.
Yeah.
Would Tazama not want to build the Helm artifacts, much like the Docker images?
I don't know, right? Because what is hold that thought also for a second, right? Because we did say in some of
I
our earlier sessions that we have to provide for the Jenkins build process as well, right? So, um, in case it's not Docker Hub, but there are two sources of a deployment. There's Docker Hub, which is our pre-compiled, right? And I think the answer here is almost similar because we determined we needed the Jenkins process anyway because some people in their deployment will choose a non-default deployment or a non-default. They'll modify a container, customize it, or whatever the case is, or it's slightly different, or they want their own hardened security implementation for an image. Doesn't matter. They want to be able to do their own. They want to roll their own container image, right? Or they're quite comfortable, especially in a development environment, to just take the Docker Hub image. Either of those are fine. And I think the same thing here will apply at the very least, right? What I want to draw a parallel to is what happens today, right? Because, and I'll tell you why. I have never actually heard of this specific step where you are building the Helm artifact, which in my mind means that this is not something that we currently maintain anywhere. I mean, do you think it is in here somewhere? I don't think so.
It's not, I checked, yeah.
Yeah. And if we were to, instead of building the Helm artifacts, if we were to host pre-built Helm artifacts, where do people typically do that? What is the Docker hub for Helm artifacts?
It's generally, may I take over screen sharing quick? I can
Yeah,
probably share.
sure.
Just to give you a visual representation of it. I'll use Elastic as an example. Share. So they've got this would be their Helm artifacts. It's a single page, which I guess is a YAML or it's an XML file actually. And this is the repo that you add. So if you're installing Elastic, you go Helm repo add helm.elastic.co, which uses this file, right?
Okay.
But what Tazama has is more like this, which is now archived. I'm sure they have another page, but this was in my history. So this would be the actual definitions of those files. So this, I'm sure, looks familiar. There's YAML files probably in here, which define the charts and so forth. This is what we've seen before, right? But what we don't have, what Tazama doesn't have, is the pre-built artifact. So I myself don't need to go to the code. It's publicly hosted, of course, if I want to see or update stuff or something else. But I'll go back to the Docker example. This should be plenty enough for me without the complication of all this. I can build the same thing using the code, of course, but it's usually the Helm artifact that is shared with people.
That's the TGZ file.
It's a file, when you run the build command, you get the TGZ file, yes. And then
Okay.
that file will have an index.yaml, which is this thing over here.
So
But
this
this is an
is,
XML, so
yeah, just to be precise, the
Mhm.
process is called packaging the Helm chart. And that is a
Correct.
package.tgz chart. So this artifact here
Yes.
is actually this, right?
You can take over screen. I think my quick demo is done.
Okay, wow, that's a lot of wall of text. Okay, so you'll have to drop the share. I can't share until you've
Oh, do I?
until you've relinquished it.
Apologies. Stop share.
All right, let's go back here. Dom, question for you. All right. So you're you're the person who started this journey in the same position as me, as not having done this before. So I want to correlate this particular step with your current experience on deploying Tazama via Helm. Is this something that you had to do, or did you notice it at all as part of the process?
Sorry, were you addressing me?
Yes, Dom, it's you.
Yes, yeah. Actually, I never encountered having to build the Helm artifacts. For me, it was really just the charts. So, yeah, my first pass was using the on-prem Helm from the GitHub repository. So that's what I started with. And
Right.
it was really just a matter of, I think, Helm deploy if I remember the commands correctly. So there was no build stage from what I was doing. And then the next stage, I basically, I got as far as I could with the on-prem Helm repo. So I decided, I got stuck somewhere at the Jenkins portion. It was basically just building. I got only as far as building the infrastructure components. It did not deploy anything else. So I put that aside, and then I rebuilt my own Helm charts, but basing it off my experience with the Docker full stack. So the Helm charts that I did end up building deployed the infrastructure components as well as the Tazama core components, as well as whatever rules that I needed to deploy. And all of the images that I needed came from Docker Hub.
Okay.
Hi, Justus.
Hi, Brian.
Okay,
You got
maybe
any insight for us here?
I may comment. Apologies, I'm in transit, so my communication may not be the best. To comment on what Rodney was asking, I was looking at it and I was actually thinking like that might be approach we might follow, especially if we are still to consider a Helm file. And how I was looking at it was, okay, we do have existing Helm charts for services like the DB and our Elk stack, but then we need to look at how to deploy, for example, the rules, the typology processors and all that. And how I was looking at it is we could actually make the Helm packages or Helm releases as part of the release, the same way we do with our Docker images. I think that's what Rodney was trying to speak to. And it's actually not as complicated. It's just like what it would require from us is adding that config or commands to facilitate that. And what you just need to do is package the Helm file or create a Helm package and then upload the package or the chart to your artifact tab, which is where we store the Helm charts. And then you can now pull the chart from the artifact tab.
Right.
Okay, how it would also work with Helmfile is once you already have the charts, you could now have your Helmfile, and then you specify the specific charts within the Helmfile. I don't know if that provides some clarity.
That does. That gives us two different approaches, right? And if I understand the two correctly, you can basically do a Helm install straight out of our GitHub, which uses the raw chart, right? Or we can publish a packaged chart, which means people can then install the packaged chart. What I'm not sure of, and I don't think that we should do this in this session, but I want to make a note as an action, is to understand the difference and the value of those two approaches, right? Because I understand if we are saying that a packaged chart is pre-compiled, right, and we host that, then it's really no different for me than somebody doing the install off our GitHub or doing the install off the package chart, because there's no gap between them. They're essentially the same thing. So all we're really doing is providing somebody an alternative based on their preference, which I'm okay with, because, if it might make it easier for some people than, to do it one way than another way, then it makes sense to have that opportunity. Also, I would assume that if you are publishing the package, you're putting it on a repository somewhere or a registry somewhere, so they can fetch it straight from the registry instead of having to clone down the GitHub repository and working straight with the source files. So I suppose there are trade-offs in both cases. What I'd like to do here is to make an action for us to just get an understanding of what the difference is between those two approaches, what we get out of it, and what we give up because of it. But either one of those sound like fine. I just want to, my summary then is that both of those two things eventually achieve the same result, but they are effectively alternatives with some trade-offs. Is that a correct summary?
Okay, yeah.
Sorry,
Okay, I'd
right?
say pretty much. Okay, pretty much. Looking at it, I'll say what we get with Helm files. Okay. We can actually deploy from the Helm packages directly, as you mentioned. And so that's an option. But I was looking at it is also what you get is you can actually define the sequence in which you want your charts to be deployed. So that is the biggest advantage of difference when it comes to Helm files from how I was looking at it. So it gives you that level of control when it comes to deployment. For example, you may want to deploy your database Helm charts, or for example, Helm charts before you deploy the rules Helm charts. And so Helm file will help you with that. Okay, without the Helm file, you can still get deployments working with Helm. But now there's that order which you now miss.
Okay. I'm going to put this here. Because essentially, if we are pre-publishing these, then it'll end up on some kind of registry, right? And people can use it from there. That's fine, right? And that's preparation. So that's not something that you do as part of your deployment process. That's something that we had already done for you, and now it's just available for you to use. Right. That means that you still have the install step, but you're choosing whether you're installing it off the registry or whether you are installing it off GitHub
The
directory.
source code. Mhm.
Right. And then this could be, there's an opportunity here. Put like a long arrow the long way around. So in theory, you can do it this way as well if you want to, which goes direct. Okay. Is that more or less where we're at? Up to the install piece.
Yes.
Okay, great. That feels like progress. All right. So what does the installation of the Helm charts actually do? Yeah, this feels like a terribly ignorant question, but what do we get at the end of this?
Okay, with your Helm install, you get what you'd normally get when you run your kubectl, apply the manifest file or the YAML files. So, for example, if you had a deployment.yaml and you'd run kubectl, apply the deployment and the service as well, Helm does pretty much a similar thing.
Yep. So to oversimplify it, Justice, you can think of it as like your Docker Compose up. Obviously, it depends on what you have configured your Helm charts to do, but ideally that would be, to set up and start Tazama. So you'd probably wait a couple of minutes while the database and all those images pull from Docker Hub, probably get some coffee there. But once it's done, you should have Tazama up and running. Configuration pending, depending on what we want to do with the admin server side.
Okay. That's straightforward enough. That's basically, well, let's say this is what it does. This is actually then, yes, okay, cool. The next step in the process would be to configure it then, because the installing the Helm charts is actually the deployment, right? And this would leverage all of the Tazama GitHub repos, and that information will then go into the system, right? That's where all of those container images come from. Well, hang on a second. Where does
that
Jenkins go for it, Brian?
Well, I was like, I meant to ask, does that include the Postman, the Postman files that you had mentioned? I remember. Was it the JSON files? Some that
Yeah.
configure kicklock, others the DB.
Right. So Postman, for the purposes of the deployment, I want to see if we can avoid, right? Partly because Postman is also under a BSL license. So it's not an open source product necessarily, although it is typically free to use for people. But because it has its own sort of licensing schema, as Tazama, we can't really tell people to use it, right? It doesn't feel okay. But there's also the things that we would typically have relied on Postman for in the past was the database configuration, which we are now doing in a different way. And then also the system configuration, which we have driven all of those functions to the admin service API, right? So in theory, there aren't any use cases left for Postman that I am aware of. We actively tried to move those functions somewhere else. So hopefully you don't have to use Postman or Newman, either one of the two. In particular, because the functionality that we were using no longer exists. There is no database API. You can't connect to the database directly. And if we are deploying the database for the first time, we actually want the deployment SQL scripts to set the database up from scratch at the initial deployment. That is perhaps a different conversation when you're talking about redeploying, especially if you're redeploying to make changes to the database, or you want to preserve the database. You don't want to like erase everything and start from scratch. So let's park that for a future discussion. But at the moment, maybe just to check in with everybody, can we see a need for Postman Newman here? Dom, you didn't have to do that. You only had to do that for the configuration piece, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Right. And in theory, you can still do that via Postman, but you can also do that via curl, right? Because we are saying that curl is nice and generic. So this is now Postman curl to the admin service API. And you choose how you want to do it. Right? That's the configuration piece. We give you JSON objects and you put the JSON objects into the database. Nice and easy. Or into the API, not even the database. Right? So that happens here as configuration. I just want to take a quick step to this process here, right? If we are doing the Helm charts installation, where does Jenkins happen? Because I'm assuming by default, the Helm charts will easily use Docker Hub, right? So it can just take the images that we have published on Docker Hub and directly deploy those onto the system, onto Kubernetes. That's what Helm is going to be able to do, right? Is that a reasonable assumption of the easiest case?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Now, can you describe the Jenkins alternative? So instead of using the pre-compiled containers on Docker Hub, how do I use images that are being compiled out of GitHub repos?
Okay. So I'm just spitballing here, but the way it looks in my mind is that we'd also include Jenkins in the Helm charts, right? So when you deploy, you also get a Jenkins deployment. Yes. Jenkins, you can, well, you can do that. So with Jenkins, you can export your config, right? So all the jobs you have inside of it. And I think that's what we have in the Tazama repos as well for Jenkins specifically. You can then import them. That could be done through Helm as well. I'm trying to think of the word. I think it's called setup scripts that would then sort of like initialize your Jenkins deployment with the custom jobs. So all those would get extracted and then shipped into that Jenkins through a script in Helm. So you could then have your Jenkins be up and running with...
after your...
Sorry, Brian. I don't know if you're talking to us, but you're not on mute.
My bad. I was in another...
Thank you.
Okay, but if I may also comment, sorry for cutting you short.
Sure, go ahead.
I think this also takes us back to the discussion we had with Foley, where we were to compare the two, and that is if we could still stick with Jenkins or GitHub Actions, because we can pretty much achieve the same thing with both. So currently, I bet as the configs are on GitLab, it only does the build, compile, okay, creates the image, pushes it to Docker Hub, and that's it. But you could actually add another job on GitHub Actions that does the deployment. In this case, now deploys the Helm charts that we've pushed to the Helm chart registry. So I think there maybe we need to have another session to compare if we are still going to stick with Jenkins or we are going to use GitHub Actions for the same. It's actually weighing the options. They'll all do the same thing. And I think also maybe what will need to be added to the discussion is Argo CD, because they all handle the continuous deployment part of
Yes.
our Helm charts. Once we have the Helm charts.
So at the moment, the GitHub Actions does handle our publishing to Docker Hub, right?
Yeah.
So when you merge code, you automatically publish to Docker Hub, and that we won't necessarily change, but that is a process that is independent of a deployment. That happens anyway.
Yeah.
Right? So we then end up with something on, actually, this is not a process. It's just a sort of like, it's a mechanism. So let's do that here.
So the same way GitHub Actions does our build, it's the same way we can also configure it to do the deployment. So end-to-end CI/CD, we can set up GitHub Actions to do the same. I would say maybe what's lacking right now on GitHub Actions is the continuous deployment part, but it can do that. But remember, there's also the talk of Argo CD, which can also do the continuous deployment. So we may need a session to like align on the actual tool that we'll use for the deployment, because it could be GitHub Actions, it could be Jenkins or Argo CD.
So you're saying that we could actually use GitHub Actions during the Helm deployment. So we are triggering GitHub Actions to compile our container images and then deploy them.
Yeah, we can do that from GitHub Actions.
Yeah. Sorry, can I step in here?
Please, Tom.
No, because I do remember a few meetings. Well, one of the concerns around GitHub Actions was that it wasn't fully open source, and therefore it was a decision that we would then be making for the other folks. So Jenkins seemed to be the more generic way of doing things. So that was the that was the discussion we had. I mean, if the decision is just go for GitHub Actions, then that was actually what I did suggest the last time we met on this one. But I'm sort of taking a step back. It's because does GitHub Actions force the users, or whoever wants to use Tazama to also use GitHub whatever their other choices for repo and registry are? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, which is fine if they are only using Tazama components, but if they have modified them or if they have forked them and they are then hosting them inside Bitbucket or something else, then yes, they suddenly have a gap in their deployment. I want to comment on the GitHub Actions one for now, right? In two ways, because this is, I suppose, let's call it current. This is immediately available. It exists right now. You can do it this way, right? The Jenkins process is the current existing process. We already have some functionality that is structured around Jenkins. Then in addition to that, the GitHub runner for me, this is like a new process. And if we are prioritizing our time, I would almost want to say is this should be the default because it requires the least effort from us, right? Then if I prioritized it, the Jenkins should be next because it is already something that is in place to a certain extent, right? So, and then the last one is the GitHub Actions, which is something new, which is going to require either somebody who already knows how to do it and can do it for us, or it's going to take a little bit of extra work for us to put in place. So against that background, I would almost say, let's start with the Docker Hub, right? Let's plan for the Jenkins, and then let's backlog the GitHub actions. Does that seem like a reasonable approach for everyone?
Yeah, but in this case, it's now a conscious decision that the configuration, okay, for the Helm chart will be using the images from Docker Hub, and it's an
Yes.
assumption. Yes. Okay.
Yes, that is currently, well, it's a phased approach, right? So, but that is going to be phase one because that's the easy one, right? If we think about it as an MVP, the minimum viable product for a Helms-based implementation is to use the images of Docker Hub, right? That requires the least amount of effort. It's the quickest up and running. But, and I want to follow on with that because you raise a good point, right? I want to make sure that we are architecting the Helm charts approach to be able to follow another approach, right? I don't want to have to rebuild them from scratch if we already know that we are at least going to add Jenkins and possibly going to add GitHub Actions. So the question I have for you guys is, how do the Helm charts pick an approach, right? Is it a completely new Helm chart? Or is it in some way modular where I can say the source for my Helm charts here can be selected during a deployment? I can choose Docker Hub, or I can choose Jenkins, or I can choose GitHub Actions. How does that decision impact the structure of the Helm charts? Does anybody know?
Well, for the Helm charts, it's really just a pointer. Okay, it's one of the parameters, which just get the Helm chart, okay, get the image from this registry. So yeah,
hold that thought,
yeah,
right? Because the Jenkins isn't a registry; it's a process.
correct. That's right. Yeah, because the also the way the way on-prem Helm was configured was that I think it attempted to be an automated process, so much so that if you modified one of the uh, Tazama components, then it's something that you called so that it would then build that component. So yeah, in that regard, the old on-prem Helm approach was still divided into two parts. First part was just a Helm chart to deploy the infrastructure components, and then it will also deploy Jenkins under Helm, but you ran Jenkins in order to build the container images that you
And
have modified.
to add on, you also need a registry because Jenkins would then publish those to a particular registry,
That's right.
which
Yeah.
Kubernetes would then pull from.
Yeah.
So does it trigger the process and then pull, or does the process have to be triggered separately?
The process being?
To
Jenkins.
build the Jenkins, to use Jenkins to publish the images onto that registry.
That would be automatic, I think. So there's, if I'm recalling the YAML files in Jenkins, there's a publish and then the apply, which happens after the publish will then pull from that. But that's a very interesting thing that we're now heading into now is that Jenkins is not just Jenkins itself. It assumes you have an image registry ready, which will also be the configuration for Jenkins, right? So Jenkins has all these variables specific to it. So yeah, you do need an image registry. We've used Nexus before. It's free. I don't know if it's open source, but the licensing is pretty free. So That's, I think, what Brian was heading into, meaning that if we get rid of Jenkins and use GitHub Actions, you can use GitHub's container registry, which uh, is hosted by GitHub. So you can also just publish your images there.
I have a
Yeah,
question.
both cases seem pretty opinionated to me. Like if you decide to use Jenkins to do the build versus using GitHub Actions to also do the build. And I think the way I see this is you're setting this up on behalf or thinking about organizations that want to modify Tazama and do the build.
Yes.
So, well, first question is that really is that territory that we want to get into, right? No, because for instance, I mean, there are yet other alternatives if I'm running my infrastructure internally. So I could be using, for instance, GitLab, which has its own registry, or I might also deploy Harbor as my own internal registry. Therefore, it's my own process that after the build pushes the images to those registries. So it's really you really have a plethora of registry options in this case.
Yeah, we don't want to be. So this has always been our challenge, right?
Yeah.
Is we want to tell people who've never done it before how we think they could do it, right?
Yeah.
But we don't want to tell everybody every possible way in which it could be done.
That's that's right. But I think for the people who have never done it before, they will like I started out as well.
Yes.
I'm not pretty far. Docker Hub was the images that Tazama already published to Docker Hub was really the way to go. But in my own directions, knowing what I know now, if I wanted to go run my own builds, I would at least now it's entering my own preferences. I would probably go GitLab. I would probably go the GitLab route. But again, it's not a choice that I will necessarily push to other people.
Right.
Yeah, it becomes intermediate to advanced enough that I think people will have their own opinions and choices how they want to do the build portion.
I feel like there are some open questions here, and I'm not able to properly contribute to the process here, right? And I'll tell you why. I'm like looking at the Helm charts. I think you guys have been watching me scroll through these, right? And my initial thought is, where is the meat on this process, right? Because the infrastructure folder over here, these are all non-Tazama components.
Yeah,
right?
correct. That's really all infrastructure. The first part was all infrastructure. So
Right.
if you're going for the meat, there is under Jenkins. It's under the Jenkins setup, right?
Right. And the
Because
Jenkins setup,
is that jobs.zip file. Okay.
yes, right.
It's actually compressed. It's actually all compressed in there.
Right. But these jobs would then, in my mind, if I understood correctly what we were talking about in this process, those jobs would build the container images, right?
Yeah.
So I'm also expecting somewhere a job of some kind to deploy those built container images onto our infrastructure, right?
But where's the registry?
Well, that I don't know.
Okay, we built them, but where do we send them to? So that's, I think, another thing that comes in with the Jenkins approach is that there's missing piece. I did mention we used Nexus, but Nexus is not a part of the Jenkins
Yeah, because in my mind, the container
setup.
images need to be built, and then hosted, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I need to just read through the process here, because where does that even go? And why on earth is there an Arango thing over here? That makes no
Yeah.
sense.
Well, yeah, but my how I approached this one previously, just this is, I actually I had to unpack jobs.zip to understand what everything that Jenkins was doing with
Right.
regards to the builds and all. So that's where all the additional scripts were. Yeah, and I mean, if thinking about it right now, having the jobs.zip there really obscures a lot of a lot of what it's doing, because hey, it's basically a binary file, so it's
Yeah.
harder to track the changes there.
But there's somewhere here there should be a registry. And then somewhere we
Yeah.
should have something that picks things up off the registry and then somehow deploys them.
Yeah.
And there are pieces of this puzzle that is missing for me. So I'm going to give myself homework for next week
Yeah.
to just review and try and understand the existing process, because I feel like I'm not able to effectively contribute to the conversation if I don't understand some of
Well,
these fundamentals, because I'm looking
yeah.
at the repo, right?
Yeah.
And somewhere I'm expecting a series of Helm charts to take those images and put them onto our hardware, because we have Helm charts for the infrastructure. So why are there no Helm charts for the Tazama? Where's Tazama going?
No,
Where's it coming from?
no, because the
Yes.
Helm charts is not supposed to put the images to the registry. Helm charts is supposed to read from the registry and deploy them to your Kubernetes.
Sure,
So
right?
yeah,
So
right.
we are saying that the Jenkins step almost needs
Mhm.
to happen first.
Yes, yeah.
And
It
how is
just
it triggered or automated in this process, right? How do we get from
um
here? How does this top part actually happen?
yeah. Sorry, I've forgotten. Okay, I didn't delve too deeply into Jenkins after I realized that for me it wasn't the way I wanted to go. That's why I ended up okay, building okay, uh, building it off the full stack Docker, and then using Helm to deploy infrastructure core and the rules.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, but I think if I recall,
Um,
I mean, yeah, very broadly.
maybe I
Sorry.
can answer it for you,
Yeah,
Justice.
okay, go ahead, Brad.
So I don't know if you've noticed like the deployment.yaml file in like most of the processes repos. There's like you can go through them really quickly. You'll see like a
Yes.
deployment.yaml service.yaml file. There's those are Kubernetes manifest files, right? So you apply those resources, which in turn what it does is it creates the deployment. So if you open the deployment.yaml over there, that's a Kubernetes manifest
Oh, here we go.
file.
Okay.
Yeah. So what the Jenkins job do is that you see line 32, for example.io. So that tells the Kubernetes where to pull the image from. What Jenkins does is to override that particular example.io with the
With its actual
uh,
location.
exactly, yes, which you've configured in Jenkins. I see something like FRM full secret line 44 as well. I think maybe that's documented. I'm not sure. But that's what was in use for Nexus, which
That's
we
valuable
used
context,
before.
Rodney, because this is the piece that I
Mm.
was kind of missing. And I don't know that this piece is properly documented as a overall part of the process. We are at time, and unfortunately, I need to go to another meeting. But this has been a fascinating discussion, very educational for me. I do feel like this feels like tangible. We are getting towards a process now. We now know what the components are, where those components need to be updated, what needs to be prepared for us to be able to automate the full process. This was super helpful. So thank you very much, everyone. And then we'll pick it up again next week. Awesome.
Enjoy the evening. Cheers, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.